Sarah Thompson stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she finished another detailed financial report. The office around her buzzed with the usual Monday morning activity, but her mind was focused on the email she had received earlier that day, another rejection for the management position she had applied for 3 times now. At 32, Sarah had already accomplished more than most people in the finance department at Morton and Associates. Her desk was adorned with small achievements, Employee of the Month certificates, recognition awards, and a framed photo of her graduation day from Wharton Business School, where she had finished at the top of her class. Yet, somehow, these accolades seemed to matter little when it came to advancing her career. The sound of laughter drew her attention to the break room, where Richard Coleman, the head of department, was chatting with James Peterson, a junior analyst who had joined the company just 2 years ago. Sarah couldn't help but notice how Coleman's eyes crinkled with approval as he patted James on the back. The same James who had needed Sarah's help to complete his last 3 major projects. "Sarah, do you have those quarterly projections ready?" Lisa, her cubicle neighbor, called out. Lisa was one of the few colleagues who openly acknowledged the unfairness of Sarah's situation. "Just finishing up," Sarah replied, quickly saving her work. As she printed the documents, she remembered her husband Marcus's words from that morning. "You're the most qualified person in that department, honey. They can't ignore your talents forever." Marcus didn't know how wrong he was. For 6 years, Sarah had watched as less qualified colleagues, primarily white males, climbed the corporate ladder while she remained stuck in the same position. Despite her MBA, despite her perfect record, despite bringing in more clients than any other analyst in the department, something always seemed to stand in her way. That something, though never explicitly stated, was becoming increasingly clear to everyone who paid attention. Walking to Coleman's office with the projections, Sarah overheard him on the phone. "Yes, we're looking to fill the management position soon. I have someone in mind who really fits our company culture." The words, company culture, made Sarah's stomach turn. She had heard them often enough to understand their implied meaning. She knocked on his door, maintaining her professional composure. "The quarterly projections you requested, Mr. Coleman," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Coleman barely looked up, waving his hand dismissively. "Just leave them there, Thompson. I'll look at them later." As Sarah turned to leave, she noticed the family photos on Coleman's desk, all showing him at various country clubs and golf courses with people who looked exactly like him. Not a single face in those photos reflected the diversity that Morton and Associates claimed to value in their mission statement. Back at her desk, Sarah opened her email to find yet another company-wide announcement, celebrating diversity at Morton and Associates. The irony wasn't lost on her. In 6 years, she had remained the only black woman in a senior position within the finance department, and even that position seemed to have an invisible ceiling above it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's your day going, love? Don't forget we have dinner with the investment firm tonight." Sarah smiled, thinking about her husband's success as a CEO of one of the most prestigious investment firms in the city. He had fought his own battles to reach where he was, but few people in her office knew about her connection to him. She had insisted on keeping her achievements separate from his influence, wanting to succeed on her own merit. Looking at the clock, Sarah realized she had another 3 hours before she could leave. 3 more hours of watching Coleman parade around the office, making empty promises about growth opportunities while systematically ensuring that certain employees remained exactly where they were. As she turned back to her work, Sarah made a decision. She would apply for the management position one more time, but this time she would document everything. Every email, every meeting, every subtle dismissal. It was time to build a case that even Coleman couldn't ignore. Little did she know that the upcoming company charity gala would change everything, bringing her face to face with a reality that would force Coleman to confront his own biases in the most unexpected way. The finance department buzzed with excitement as Sarah's latest financial strategy saved Morton and Associates an unprecedented $4.2 million in the third quarter. Employees gathered around the conference room, watching her confident presentation as she explained how she had identified and fixed critical inefficiencies in their investment portfolio. Richard Coleman sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as Sarah displayed the final figures. The success was undeniable, and even he couldn't find fault in her meticulous work. Yet, His eyes kept drifting to James Peterson, who had contributed little more than basic data entry to the project. "Excellent work," Coleman announced after the presentation, but his next words made Sarah's heart sink. "James, your assistance in this project shows great promise. I'd like to see you in my office later to discuss your future with the company." Sarah packed up her materials, maintaining her professional composure despite the familiar sting of being overlooked. Lisa, her loyal colleague, approached her after the meeting. "Did you see that?" Lisa whispered, her voice tight with anger. "He's going to promote James for your work. Again." Sarah nodded, having expected nothing less. "It's not surprising anymore, is it?" Later that afternoon, the announcement came via email. James Peterson was being promoted to senior management, a position Sarah had been pursuing for years. The email praised his innovative thinking and leadership qualities, the very qualities Sarah had demonstrated in the project he was being credited for. The office grew quiet as Sarah read the email at her desk. She could feel the sympathetic glances from her colleagues, hear the hushed conversations about the unfairness of it all. Even some of the white employees were beginning to notice the pattern in Coleman's promotion decisions. During lunch, Sarah sat in the courtyard, picking at her salad while reviewing the documentation she'd been gathering. 6 years of exemplary performance reviews, countless successful projects, letters of recommendation from clients, even an email from the CEO praising her work on a particularly challenging account. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, sweetheart. How's your day going?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to burden him with her struggles. They promoted James Peterson to senior management. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "The same James who needed your help with basic financial modeling last month?" "The very same," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Coleman's making it pretty clear what kind of leadership he's looking for." "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, his CEO voice emerging. "You know, my firm is looking to partner with Morton and Associates. Maybe it's time they knew who they were dealing with." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I want to handle this my way. I've been documenting everything." After lunch, Sarah returned to find an email from HR requesting quarterly diversity statistics. The irony wasn't lost on her as she looked around the department, 32 employees, and she was still the only black woman above entry level. Coleman paraded James around the office, introducing him to everyone as the future of Morton and Associates. Sarah watched as James stumbled through explanations of the very strategies she had developed, his confidence bolstered by Coleman's constant praise. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave, she overheard Coleman in his office. "Yes, James is exactly what we need in management. He understands our values, our traditions. He'll fit right in at the country club." Sarah's hand tightened on her briefcase. She thought about her father, who had worked 2 jobs to put her through business school, about her mother, who had always told her to work twice as hard for half the recognition. They had prepared her for this, but it didn't make it any easier. As she walked to her car, Sarah received an invitation to the upcoming charity gala. Usually, she avoided these events, knowing they were just another reminder of her outsider status. But this time, something told her to accept. Marcus would be there, representing his investment firm, though Coleman had no idea about their connection. Looking at her reflection in her car window, Sarah straightened her shoulders. The promotion might have gone to James, but she wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The charity gala would be more than just another networking event. It would be the beginning of a change that Coleman never saw coming. Sarah spent her lunch break in the company's human resources department, her hands steady as she reviewed personnel files she had officially requested. As a senior analyst, she had the right to access certain company records, and what she found made her blood boil. The numbers didn't lie. In front of her lay proof of what she had suspected for years. Her qualifications far exceeded not only James Peterson's but every other manager Coleman had promoted in the past 6 years. Her MBA from Wharton, her consistent top performance ratings, and her impressive client portfolio made her the most qualified candidate by any objective measure. Linda Martinez, the HR assistant who had helped her access the files, watched nervously from her desk. "Sarah, I've been here 15 years, she said in a low voice. "What you're seeing. It's not new, but nobody's ever had the courage to challenge it." Sarah carefully photographed each relevant document with her phone, making sure to capture the dates and signatures. Her hands trembled slightly as she came across her latest rejection letter, filed next to James's promotion paperwork. The contrast was stark, her extensive qualifications dismissed with a simple, "not the right fit at this time." Back at her desk, Sarah organized her findings into a detailed spreadsheet. 6 years of data revealed a clear pattern. Every single management promotion under Coleman had gone to white male employees, despite several highly qualified women and minorities applying for the positions. "Sarah, you might want to see this," Lisa whispered, stopping by her desk. She slipped Sarah a printed email chain she had accidentally been copied on. The emails, exchanged between Coleman and other department heads, discussed maintaining the traditional leadership structure of the company. As Sarah read through the emails, her office phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, love. Just checking in. How's the documentation coming along?" "It's worse than we thought," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. "I found enough evidence to make a solid case for discriminatory practices." "Be careful," Marcus warned. "Coleman has connections throughout the industry. He could make things difficult for you." Just then, Coleman emerged from his office, walking past Sarah's desk with James and Tao. "And that's how we maintain our standards here at Morton and Associates," he was saying loudly. "Some people just don't understand our corporate culture." Sarah felt her colleagues' eyes on her, some sympathetic, others afraid to show support openly. She remembered her mother's words. "Sometimes you have to be the one to open the door for others." During the afternoon meeting, Sarah watched as James stumbled through a presentation she had helped him prepare. Coleman beamed with pride, interrupting to praise James' natural leadership abilities, the same abilities Sarah had demonstrated for years. After the meeting, several younger employees of color approached Sarah quietly, sharing their own stories of being passed over for promotions and opportunities. Each story strengthened her resolve. That evening, as Sarah prepared to file her formal complaint, she received an unexpected email from the company's board of directors. They were requesting her presence at a private meeting following the upcoming charity gala. Her heart raced as she read the message. This could either be her opportunity for justice or a subtle warning to back down. In her home office later that night, Sarah organized her evidence while Marcus reviewed her draft complaint. "This is solid," he said, his expression serious. "But are you ready for what comes next? Coleman won't take this lying down." Sarah looked at the photos on her wall, her parents at her MBA graduation, her first day at Morton and Associates, the community service award she received for mentoring young black women in finance. "I'm not just doing this for me," she said firmly. "This has to stop." As she finalized her complaint, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues expressing their support, albeit privately. The fear of retaliation was real, but so was the hope for change. What Sarah didn't know was that Coleman was about to face a reality check he never expected. The charity gala wasn't just another social event. It would become the catalyst for a transformation that would shake Morton and Associates to its core. The man who had systematically denied her promotions was about to learn a valuable lesson about judging people by their appearance rather than their abilities. The annual Morton and Associates Charity Gala transformed the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom into a sea of elegant evening wear and polished networking smiles. Richard Coleman stood near the entrance, greeting important clients and potential partners with practiced charm, his focus particularly sharp tonight as he awaited the arrival of Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Global Investments. Sarah arrived wearing a stunning royal blue gown, turning heads as she walked through the ballroom. Several colleagues did double takes. They were used to seeing her in business attire, not this confident, elegant version of herself. She noticed Coleman barely acknowledged her presence, too busy scanning the crowd for the influential CEO he hoped to impress. "The Thompson Global Investments team should be here any minute," Coleman announced to his circle of senior managers. "This partnership could change everything for us. I want everyone on their best behavior." Lisa approached Sarah with 2 glasses of champagne. "Look at Coleman sweating. I heard Thompson Global Investments is worth billions. No wonder he's nervous." Sarah sipped her champagne, hiding a knowing smile. She had chosen to arrive separately from Marcus tonight, understanding the importance of timing in what was about to unfold. The room's energy shifted as Marcus Thompson entered the ballroom. At 6 feet tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, He commanded attention without effort. Coleman practically rushed to greet him, hand extended. "Mr. Thompson, we're honored to have you here tonight. I'm Richard Coleman, head of finance at Morton and Associates." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Coleman. I've heard interesting things about your department's management style." Coleman's smile faltered slightly but recovered quickly. "Only good things, I hope. Please, let me introduce you to some of our top people." He began guiding Marcus toward James Peterson and other recently promoted managers. Sarah watched the scene unfold, timing her approach perfectly. She was engaged in conversation with a client when Marcus spotted her across the room. His face lit up with a warm smile. "If you'll excuse me," Marcus said to Coleman, smoothly stepping away from the group. He walked directly toward Sarah, leaving Coleman staring in confusion. "There's my beautiful wife," Marcus said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, kissing Sarah's cheek. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. Traffic was terrible." The silence that fell over their corner of the ballroom was deafening. Coleman's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, horror, as he realized the connection. "Your wife?" Coleman managed to stammer, looking between Sarah and Marcus. "Yes, Sarah and I have been married for 5 years now," Marcus replied casually. "Though I'm sure you knew that, given how closely you review your employees' files for promotion considerations." Coleman's complexion had taken on an ashen quality. Other executives from Thompson Global Investments were now approaching, all warmly greeting Sarah by name. "Sarah's actually been instrumental in advising us on several successful strategies," one of Marcus's senior partners commented. "We've been trying to recruit her for years, but she's remarkably loyal to Morton and Associates." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone watching. Coleman stood frozen, realizing that the woman he'd repeatedly passed over for promotion was married to the CEO, whose partnership he desperately needed. "Mr. Coleman," Sarah said professionally, "I believe we have a meeting scheduled with the board next week to discuss some interesting patterns I've discovered in our department's promotion history. Perhaps we should add Mr. Thompson to that invitation." Coleman's attempt to maintain composure was failing spectacularly. He loosened his collar, eyes darting between Sarah and Marcus, suddenly seeing her in a completely different light. As the evening continued, word spread quickly through the ballroom. Sarah maintained her dignity and professionalism, even as she could see Coleman frantically conferring with other executives in corners, likely trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected situation. What Coleman didn't realize was that this revelation was just the beginning. The documentation sitting in Sarah's office, combined with her husband's influence in the industry, was about to force a reckoning that would change Morton and Associates forever. The next week's board meeting would prove to be even more interesting than tonight's revelations. The morning after the charity gala, Morton and Associates' offices buzzed with whispered conversations. The news of Sarah's marriage to Marcus Thompson spread like wildfire, and the sight of Richard Coleman rushing into his office, looking disheveled and anxious, only fueled the gossip. Sarah arrived at her usual time, carrying herself with the same professional dignity she always had. But today, something was different. Colleagues who had previously avoided eye contact now smiled warmly. Those who had stayed silent during years of obvious discrimination found their voices. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" Coleman's secretary called out nervously. "Mr. Coleman would like to see you in his office immediately." Inside Coleman's office, the atmosphere was tense. The normally confident department head sat behind his desk, his tie slightly askew, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Sarah, Mrs. Thompson," he corrected himself quickly. "I've been reviewing your file this morning. Your work has been exceptional, truly exceptional." Sarah remained silent, watching him squirm. The same file he'd reviewed countless times before during her rejected promotion applications suddenly seemed to hold new meaning for him. In fact, Coleman continued, shuffling papers on his desk, "I believe we may have overlooked some significant achievements in your portfolio. The recent cost-saving strategy you developed, for instance, brilliant work." Through the glass walls, Sarah could see other employees trying to appear busy while obviously watching the interaction. Lisa gave her a subtle thumbs up from her desk. "Mr. Coleman," Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. Are you suggesting that my qualifications have somehow changed since last week's rejection for the management position? Coleman's face reddened. No, no, of course not. Perhaps I didn't fully appreciate your contributions before. Speaking of which, I've scheduled an emergency meeting with HR to discuss creating a new director-level position I believe you would be perfect for. Because of my qualifications? Sarah interrupted. Or because you discovered who my husband is? The silence that followed was deafening. Coleman's mouth opened and closed several times before he found words. Now, Sarah, let's not make assumptions about. I have documentation, Mr. Coleman, Sarah said quietly. 6 years of systematic discrimination. Emails, performance reviews, promotion records. Everything. The color drained from Coleman's face as Sarah continued. And yes, my husband is very interested in forming a partnership with Morton and Associates. But Marcus believes in ethical business practices and equal opportunities, values that seem to be lacking in certain departments here. Just then, Coleman's phone buzzed. His eyes widened as he read the message. The board wants to see me immediately, he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. Yes, they do, Sarah confirmed. They received some very interesting data this morning about our department's promotion patterns. I believe they're also on a conference call with Thompson Global Investments' legal team. Coleman loosened his collar, looking trapped. The powerful department head who had dismissed Sarah for years now seemed small and afraid. What do you want? He asked weakly. I want what I've always wanted. Fair treatment for everyone in this department, regardless of their race, gender, or who they're married to. The board meeting next week isn't just about me, Mr. Coleman. It's about changing a system that you perpetuated for far too long. As Sarah stood to leave his office, she paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Coleman, I'll be declining that director position offer. When I move up in this company, it will be because of my work, not my connections. The rest of the day saw Coleman rushing between meetings with HR, legal, and the board. Employees watched as different executives hurried through the halls, their faces grave. The company's comfortable status quo was crumbling. By late afternoon, Sarah received an email from the board requesting her presence at an emergency meeting the following morning. The subject line read, Departmental Restructuring and Policy Review. As she packed up to leave for the day, Sarah noticed James Peterson looking lost at his new management desk, reality finally setting in that his promotion had been built on shaky ground. The winds of change were blowing through Morton and Associates, and nothing would be the same after tomorrow's meeting. The next morning, Morton and Associates' executive floor was unusually active. Sarah arrived early, dressed in her sharpest suit, carrying a thick folder of documentation. The boardroom, typically reserved for quarterly meetings and major client presentations, was already filled with serious faces. Richard Coleman sat alone on one side of the long table, his usual confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting. The board members occupied their usual seats, while representatives from HR and legal flanked the room's corners. Most surprisingly, Marcus Thompson sat quietly in the back, his presence a silent reminder of how the power dynamics had shifted. Mrs. Thompson, the board chairman, Mr. Harrison, began, We've reviewed the documentation you submitted regarding the promotion practices in the finance department. Would you care to walk us through your findings? Sarah stood, her voice steady as she presented 6 years of meticulously gathered evidence. She showed statistics, emails, and performance reviews that painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination. The board members' expressions grew increasingly grave as she revealed how qualified candidates of color and women had been repeatedly passed over. In the past 6 years, Sarah concluded, every single management promotion under Mr. Coleman's leadership has gone to white male employees, despite numerous qualified diverse candidates. This pattern persisted even when those chosen had significantly less experience or lower performance ratings. Coleman attempted to interrupt. With all due respect, these promotions were based purely on merit. Like last week's promotion of James Peterson, Sarah countered. The same James Peterson who needed my assistance to complete basic financial analysis. The same James Peterson whose performance ratings were consistently lower than mine. The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged concerned glances. Mr. Coleman, the head of legal, spoke up. These records indicate you rejected Mrs. Thompson's application 3 times, citing a lack of leadership qualities. Yet her client satisfaction ratings are the highest in the department, and she's mentored 5 junior analysts who have all received exceptional evaluations. Coleman's face reddened. I may have overlooked certain aspects. Like you overlooked her MBA from Wharton? Marcus finally spoke from the back of the room. Or her successful cost-saving strategies that saved the company millions? Or was it something else you were seeing, or not seeing, when you looked at my wife? The implication hung heavy in the air. Coleman seemed to shrink in his chair. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, what would you recommend as a path forward? Sarah pulled out another document. I'd prepared a comprehensive proposal for departmental reform. It includes transparent promotion criteria, diverse hiring panels, mandatory bias training, and quarterly reviews of promotion patterns. This isn't about punishing individuals. It's about fixing a broken system. The board members reviewed her proposal, nodding with approval. The head of HR looked particularly impressed. And Mr. Coleman? Mr. Harrison asked. What are your thoughts on these recommendations? Coleman, now understanding the gravity of his situation, attempted damage control. I fully support these changes. In fact, I was just telling Mrs. Thompson yesterday that I'd like to offer her a director position. That won't be necessary, Sarah interrupted firmly. Any position I receive should be based on merit, not damage control or my connections. That's the whole point of why we're here. The board chairman nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Coleman, please wait outside while we discuss this matter further. As Coleman left the room, shoulders slumped, Sarah remained standing, her dignity intact. She had fought this battle not just for herself, but for every employee who had faced similar discrimination. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Harrison said, will need your help implementing these changes. Would you be willing to lead a task force on departmental reform? Sarah looked at Marcus, who smiled proudly, then back at the board. Yes, but on one condition. This has to be real change, not just paperwork and promises. Every employee deserves a fair chance to succeed. The meeting concluded with Coleman being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. As Sarah left the boardroom, she saw Lisa and other colleagues waiting anxiously for news. Their hopeful faces reminded her that this was just the beginning of a longer journey toward equality at Morton & Associates. A week after the board meeting, Morton & Associates' finance department felt like a different place. Sarah sat in the conference room, surrounded by documentation and evidence, presenting her findings to a special committee formed to investigate years of discriminatory practices. The investigation revealed more than anyone had expected. Dozens of employees came forward with their stories. Qualified candidates who had been passed over, talented professionals whose careers had stalled for no apparent reason. Each story added another piece to the puzzle Sarah had been assembling. We found 17 instances of clear discrimination in promotion decisions over the past 3 years alone, Sarah had explained to the committee, pointing to a detailed spreadsheet on the screen. The pattern becomes even more obvious when you look at the qualifications of those who were promoted versus those who were rejected. In Coleman's office, now temporarily vacant, HR representatives were going through years of personnel files. They discovered handwritten notes in the margins of certain applications, cryptic comments about cultural fit and traditional values that took on a darker meaning in light of recent revelations. Lisa knocked on the conference room door during a break. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, handing over a folder. We found these in Coleman's personal files. He kept a separate record of every diverse candidate who applied for promotion. Sarah opened the folder, her hand steady despite her rising anger. Inside were detailed notes about candidates' race, gender, and ethnic background. Information that should never have influenced hiring decisions. Meanwhile, James Peterson had voluntarily stepped down from his management position, admitting he wasn't qualified for the role. I knew something wasn't right, he confessed to HR. I just didn't want to question it when it benefited me. The board called an emergency meeting to address the mounting evidence. Sarah presented her findings alongside the legal team, her voice firm as she laid out the extent of the discrimination. This isn't just about individual promotions, she explained. It's about a systemic problem that has affected dozens of careers and potentially cost our company millions in lost talent and opportunities. Mr. Harrison, the board chairman, looked grave as he reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Thompson, your thorough investigation has exposed issues we cannot ignore. What do you recommend as immediate actions? Sarah pulled out a comprehensive proposal she had prepared. First, we need to review every promotion decision from the past 5 years. Second, we need to implement immediate changes to our hiring and promotion processes. And third, we need to create a permanent oversight committee to ensure this never happens again. The board members nodded in agreement. The head of HR spoke up. We've already begun reaching out to employees who were unfairly passed over. Several have agreed to return to Morton and Associates if we can demonstrate real change. Outside the boardroom, the office was buzzing with activity. Employees who had stayed silent for years were finally speaking up, sharing their experiences with the investigation team. The culture of fear that Coleman had created was crumbling. Marcus visited Sarah at her office that evening, finding her surrounded by files and reports. "How are you holding up?" he asked, concerned about the pressure she was under. "I'm good," Sarah replied, looking up from her work. "For the first time, I feel like we're making real progress. It's not just about my promotion anymore, it's about changing the entire system." The next day, the board made their decision official. Coleman was permanently removed from his position, and a complete departmental restructuring was announced. Sarah would lead the transition team, working to implement new policies and procedures. As she walked through the office that afternoon, Sarah noticed something different in the faces of her colleagues. Where there had once been resignation and defeat, she now saw hope. Young analysts of various backgrounds approached her, asking about career development opportunities that had previously seemed out of reach. Lisa caught up with her at the end of the day. "You know, you've changed more than just policies here. You've changed how people see themselves and what's possible." Sarah smiled, thinking of all the talented professionals who would now have a fair chance at success. The documentation in her office told a story of past injustice, but the changes being implemented would write a new chapter for Morton and Associates, one of equality, fairness, and opportunity for all. The investigation wasn't over, but the transformation had begun, and Sarah Thompson was leading the way toward a future where talent and hard work, not privilege or prejudice, would determine success. 3 months after the investigation began, Morton and Associates had transformed into a different company. Sarah sat in her new office, not as a director given to her as a hasty apology, but as the newly appointed head of corporate ethics and equality, a position she had earned through her dedication to creating real change. The morning sun streamed through her window as she reviewed the latest company statistics. In just 90 days, the implementation of new hiring and promotion policies had already shown remarkable results. 5 qualified employees who had previously been overlooked had moved into management positions, each selected through a transparent process overseen by diverse hiring panels. "Sarah, the new training program is ready for review," announced Maria Chen, one of the talented analysts who had finally received her long-overdue promotion. The mandatory bias training program they had developed together was about to be rolled out across all departments. Coleman's replacement, Diana Washington, an experienced finance executive known for her inclusive leadership style, stopped by Sarah's office. "The quarterly numbers are in," she reported with a smile. "Employee satisfaction is up 40%. And we've seen a 25% increase in applications from diverse candidates." Sarah thought back to her own struggles, remembering the days when she would stare at rejection emails, questioning her worth. Now, those memories served as fuel for the changes she was implementing. The department's weekly meeting looked different now. The conference room was filled with faces of various backgrounds, each person confident in their right to be there. James Peterson, who had returned to his analyst position, was actually thriving now that he was working at his appropriate skill level. "We've received interest from other companies wanting to learn about our new equality initiatives," Lisa announced during the meeting. "They want to know how we managed to change so quickly." Sarah shared a knowing look with Marcus, who had stopped by to observe the meeting. His investment firm had indeed partnered with Morton and Associates, but only after the company had demonstrated its commitment to real change. After the meeting, Sarah walked through the office, noticing the subtle but significant changes. The photos on the department walls now showcased the true diversity of their team. The break room conversations were livelier, with people from different backgrounds freely sharing ideas and experiences. "You know what's different?" an elderly janitor told her as she passed by. "People look each other in the eye now. Everyone says good morning, not just to the bosses." Later that afternoon, Sarah met with a group of young professionals from local colleges, part of the company's new mentorship program. Looking at their eager faces, she saw the future she had fought for, a future where talent and dedication would be the only measures of success. "My journey here wasn't easy," she told them honestly, "but it taught me something important. Sometimes you have to be the one to break down the door so others can walk through it." The board had fully embraced the changes, seeing the positive impact on both company culture and the bottom line. Client satisfaction had improved, and innovative ideas were flowing freely now that everyone felt empowered to contribute. As the day drew to a close, Sarah picked up a framed photo she was adding to her office wall. It showed her standing with the first group of employees promoted under the new system. Their smiles told the story of what was possible when barriers were removed and opportunities were truly equal. Marcus waited for her in the lobby, proud of what his wife had accomplished. "Ready to go home, champion of change?" he asked with a smile. "Almost," Sarah replied, checking her phone. "Just got word that 2 more companies want to implement our equality programs. Seems like what happened here is having a ripple effect across the industry." As they walked to their car, Sarah reflected on how one person's stand against injustice had triggered a wave of positive change. Morton and Associates wasn't perfect yet, but it was becoming what it should have been all along, a place where everyone had a fair shot at success. The lights of the city twinkled as they drove home, and Sarah thought about all the future Sarah Thompsons who would now have a clearer path to their dreams. The door wasn't just open anymore, it had been permanently removed, making way for a future where talent knows no color and success knows no bias.